5 years of marriage. That's what Julian Thorne threw away in 5 seconds. He handed his wife divorce papers while she was setting the table for their anniversary dinner, telling her she no longer fit his image. He kicked her out of their penthouse into a freezing New York rainstorm without a penny to her name. He didn't know she was clutching a positive pregnancy test in her pocket. He thought she would crawl back to him, begging. He was wrong. 3 months later, Julian walked into a high-stakes merger meeting and froze. Sitting at the head of the table, beside his deadliest business rival, was the woman he discarded. And when she stood up, everyone saw the baby bump, the sound of the diamond-encrusted pen hitting the marble countertop, echoed like a gunshot in the silent penthouse. "Sign it, Ilara. Stop making this difficult." Ilara Vance looked down at the documents spread out before her. The words, "Dissolution of marriage," swam before her tear-filled eyes. She gripped the edge of the kitchen island, her knuckles turning white. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the New York City skyline glittered, cold and indifferent. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's our 5th anniversary. The dinner is in the oven. I made your favorite." Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Enterprises and the man featured on the cover of Forbes 3 months in a row, didn't even look up from his phone. He was texting someone. A small, cruel smile played on his lips before he locked the screen and finally turned his icy blue gaze toward her. "The dinner doesn't matter, Ilara. We don't matter anymore. Look at you." He gestured vaguely at her. She was wearing a simple woolen sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She had spent the last 5 years staying in the shadows, managing his home, editing his speeches, and ensuring his life ran perfectly, all while he became a global icon. "You're a housewife. I'm a billionaire. My board of directors thinks I need a partner who brings value, influence." Ilara felt a wave of nausea roll over her. It wasn't just the heartbreak. It was the secret she was holding. Her hand instinctively went to her lower stomach. "I bring value," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I helped you navigate the merger with the Asian markets. I rewrote the contracts for the Dubai deal when your legal team missed the loophole. I've been your partner in everything but name." Julian laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You fixed a few typos, Ilara. Don't give yourself too much credit. Listen, I've met someone who matches my status. Clara Dubois." The name hit Ilara like a physical blow. Clara Dubois was the daughter of a senator, a socialite known for her fashion line and her vicious temper. She was everything Ilara wasn't: loud, public, and wealthy by birth. "You're leaving me for Clara?" Ilara asked, breathless. "I'm merging with the Dubois family," Julian corrected coldly, checking his Rolex. "Clara is just the bonus. Now sign the papers. The prenup you signed 5 years ago is ironclad. You get the jewelry I bought you and $50,000. That's it." "50,000? Ilara stared at him. "Julian, rents in this city are—" "Not my problem," he snapped. "Security is coming up in 20 minutes to escort you out. I want you gone before Clara arrives. She wants to redecorate." Ilara closed her eyes. The cruelty was breathtaking. She thought of the tiny life growing inside her. 7 weeks. She had just found out this morning. She had planned to tell him over dinner, to show him the little onesie she had bought. She thought a baby might soften him, might bring back the man she fell in love with in college. But that man was dead. She picked up the pen. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She realized in that moment that telling him about the baby would be a mistake. He would either force her to get rid of it, to protect his image, or he would take the child away from her once it was born, using his billions to paint her as an unfit mother. She signed her name, Ilara Vance. Good. Julian snatched the papers away. Pack your things. Only what you came with. 20 minutes later, Ilara stood on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. The doorman, a man she had brought coffee to every morning for 5 years, looked at her with pity but didn't say a word. It was pouring rain. She had one suitcase. Her savings account had been drained by Julian for investments months ago. She had $50,000 promised to her, but the check wouldn't clear for days. She was alone. She was pregnant, and the man she loved had just thrown her away like garbage. As she stood there, shivering, a sleek black Bugatti pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Julian's face. For a second, Ilara hoped he had changed his mind. "Oh, one last thing," Julian said, not even looking at her, his eyes on the road ahead. "Don't use the name Thorne anymore. It's a brand, and you can't afford it." The car sped off, splashing dirty puddle water over her jeans. Ilara placed a hand on her stomach. "I will never let him hurt you," she whispered to the rain. "I promise." 3 months had passed. The glamour of the Upper East Side felt like a different planet to Ilara now. She was living in a cramped, drafty studio apartment in Queens that smelled of mildew and old cooking oil. The $50,000 had largely gone to medical bills. Her pregnancy was high risk due to stress, and securing the apartment, which required 6 months of rent upfront because she had no current employment history. She had applied for jobs, hundreds of them. But Julian Thorne was a petty man. Every time she got an interview at a marketing firm or a consultancy agency, it would go well. Then, a day later, she would get a call saying the position had been closed. She suspected Julian had blacklisted her. He had likely told headhunters that his unstable ex-wife was not to be hired. So, Ilara Vance, the woman who had silently architected the business strategies of a billionaire, was now working the night shift at a 24-hour diner near the docks. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The diner was mostly empty, save for a few truckers and a man in the back corner booth who had been sitting there for 2 hours, typing furiously on a laptop. Ilara adjusted her apron. Her bump was just starting to show, a small curve hidden beneath the oversized uniform. Her back ached, and her ankles were swollen. "Refill on the coffee, honey," one of the truckers yelled. "Coming," Ilara said, her voice tired. She walked past the man in the corner booth. He looked exhausted. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the entire diner, custom Italian wool, charcoal grey. His tie was loosened, and his dark hair was disheveled, as if he had been running his fingers through it in frustration. Ilara recognized him immediately. Silas Sterling, the CIO of Sterling Global. He was Julian's only real competition. Where Julian was flashy, media-hungry, and loud, Silas was a predator in the shadows. He was known as the Wolf of Wall Street, ruthless, private, and terrifyingly intelligent. He was staring at a spreadsheet on his screen, muttering curses under his breath. Ilara poured coffee into his mug. "Rough night?" she asked softly. Silas didn't look up. "If I can't find the error in this logistics algorithm by morning, I lose a $4 billion contract to an idiot." Ilara knew exactly who that idiot was. Julian. She glanced at the screen. It was a complex supply chain matrix. Silas was trying to optimize shipping routes for a global fleet, but the code was returning a recurring 404 error on the Asian distribution nodes. Ilara shouldn't look. She should just walk away. But she remembered this specific code structure. She had studied it years ago, when she was helping Julian trying to undercut Sterling Global. "Line 452, she said quietly. Silas froze. His fingers stopped hovering over the keyboard. He slowly turned his head to look at the waitress. He saw a woman with tired eyes, no makeup, and a stained apron. "Excuse me," Silas asked, his voice deep and gravelly. "The error," Ilara said, clutching the coffee pot. "It's in line 452 of your code. You're routing the cargo through the Suez Canal parameters, but you didn't account for the new tariff variables implemented last month. It's creating a logic loop." Silas stared at her. He looked back at the screen. He scrolled down to line 452. He typed in a quick correction, adjusting the tariff variable. The screen flashed green. Optimization. Complete. Efficiency increased by 12%. Silas slammed the laptop shut and looked at Ilara with wide eyes. "Who are you?" "Just a waitress," Ilara said, turning to leave. "Enjoy the coffee." "Wait." Silas stood up. He was tall, towering over her. He blocked her path, but not aggressively. He looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "You're Ilara Thorne, Julian's wife." "Ilara Vance," she corrected him sharply, her eyes flashing with sudden fire. "I'm not his wife anymore." Silas's eyes narrowed, scanning her appearance. He took in the cheap shoes, the exhaustion, the way she subconsciously guarded her stomach. He was a man who made his fortune reading details. He saw the story instantly. Julian had discarded her, and he had left her with nothing. "Sit down," Silas commanded. It wasn't a request. "I'm working," Ilara said. "I'll buy the diner for the hour if I have to. Sit down." Ilara hesitated, then sat on the edge of the vinyl booth. "You fixed a coding error that 3 of my top analysts couldn't find in a week," Silas said, leaning forward. "Why is the ex-wife of Julian Thorne pouring coffee in a dump like this at 2 a.m.? "Because Julian blacklisted me," Ilara admitted, looking down at her hands. "And I have expenses coming up." Silas's gaze dropped to her stomach, then back to her eyes. A flicker of unreadable emotion crossed his face. Rage? Pity? No, it was calculation. "He doesn't know, does he?" Silas asked softly. "About the baby?" "No," Ilara whispered. "And he never will. He'd take it." Silas sat back, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf seeing a wounded deer and deciding to kill the hunter instead. "Ilara," Silas said, "how would you like to get revenge?" "I don't want revenge," she lied. "I just want to survive." "Bullshit," Silas said. "You want him to hurt like you hurt. I need a chief strategy officer. My current one is incompetent. You clearly know Julian's playbook better than anyone because you probably wrote it." "I can't work for you," Ilara shook her head. "If Julian finds out—" "If you work for me," Silas interrupted, "you live in my protection. My penthouse has a guest wing. It has private security. No one touches you. No one serves you papers. And you get a salary that will ensure your child goes to the best schools in the world." Ilara stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. Silas Sterling was dangerous, but being poor and vulnerable was more dangerous. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me?" "Because," Silas stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Julian Thorne took something from me years ago. I've been waiting for the right weapon to destroy him, and I think I just found her." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black card. "Be at Sterling Tower at 9 a.m. Bring your things. All of them." The next morning, Ilara didn't just walk into Sterling Tower. She was ushered in through the private underground entrance. Silas wasn't joking about the guest wing. The wing was larger than the entire penthouse she had shared with Julian. It was filled with sunlight, soft velvet furniture, and fresh flowers. "Your room," Silas said, standing in the doorway. He had changed into a fresh navy suit, looking every inch the titan of industry. "I've already had a prenatal specialist vetted. She comes to you. No hospital visits where paparazzi can spot you." Ilara set down her battered suitcase. "You've thought of everything," I always do. That's why I win. Over the next month, the dynamic shifted. Ilara expected Silas to be cold and demanding. Instead, he was intensely curious. They spent late nights in his library, not sleeping together but working. Ilara dismantled Julian's business strategies one by one. He over-leverages in Q3, Ilara explained one night, pointing at a projection. He relies on the Asian tech manufacturing deal. If you buy the supply chain for the microchips, his production halts. Silas looked at her with genuine admiration. You were the brain, he murmured. He was just the face. He's a fool for letting you go. He wanted a trophy, Ilara said, rubbing her swollen ankles. Without asking, Silas got up, grabbed a footstool, and placed it under her feet. The intimacy of the gesture made Ilara's breath hitch. Julian had never done that. You are not a trophy, Ilara, Silas said, his voice low. You're the kingmaker. The turning point came 2 weeks later. Ilara was in the kitchen of the penthouse, trying to reach a high shelf to get a glass. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness hit her. She swayed, dropping the glass. It shattered. She felt herself falling, but she never hit the floor. Strong arms caught her. Silas. He scooped her up effortlessly, holding her against his chest. I've got you, he said, his voice laced with panic she had never heard before. I've got you. He carried her to the sofa and called for the doctor immediately. He didn't leave her side for hours, holding a cold compress to her forehead. When she woke up, he was sitting on the floor beside the couch, holding her hand. The doctor said you're overworking, Silas said sternly. From now on, you work from bed, or not at all. I have to earn my keep, Ilara whispered. You've earned it 10 times over. Silas squeezed her hand. He looked at her stomach, where the baby kicked. Silas's eyes widened. Did it just move? Ilara smiled weakly. It's a boy. He kicked. Tentatively, Silas reached out his hand. May I? Ilara nodded. Silas Sterling, the cold-blooded billionaire, placed his large, warm hand on her stomach. When the baby kicked again, a look of pure wonder broke across his face. It was a look of longing. I wanted a family once, Silas confessed, his voice rough. Before my wife died. We lost the baby. Then I lost her. Ilara's heart broke for him. She squeezed his hand. I'm so sorry, Silas. Don't be. He looked at her, his eyes burning with intensity. It taught me to protect what matters. And you matter, Ilara. You and this boy. He leaned in, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. The tension in the room shifted from professional to something electric. I'm not doing this just to hurt Julian anymore, Silas whispered. I know, Ilara breathed. Good, because tomorrow is the Global Tech Gala. Silas stood up, his mask of control sliding back into place, though his eyes remained warm. Julian will be there with his new fiancée, and I think it's time we made our debut. I'm 6 months pregnant, Silas, Ilara said self-consciously. I look like a whale. You look beautiful, Silas corrected her. And we're going to make sure Julian Thorne chokes on his champagne. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was suffocatingly expensive. It was the night of the Global Tech Gala, an event where net worth was the only entry ticket that mattered. Julian Thorne stood near the ice sculpture, swirling his scotch. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo, but his eyes were bloodshot. Beside him, Clara Dubois was complaining about the lighting. It makes me look pale, Julian. Fix it. Talk to the organizers, she snapped, checking her reflection in her phone. It's fine, Clara, Julian muttered, checking his own phone. His stock had dropped 4% that morning. Sterling Global had just announced a breakthrough in logistics AI, a breakthrough that sounded suspiciously like the project Julian had been stuck on for months. Just smile. The photographers are watching. I'm bored, Clara whined. Let's leave. I want to go to the after-party at the club. We can't leave. We have to show strength. Rumors are circulating that Thorn Enterprises is bleeding cash, Julian hissed. Suddenly the room went quiet. The low hum of chatter vanished, replaced by the frantic clicking of camera shutters near the entrance. A hush swept through the crowd like a wave. "Who is that?" someone whispered nearby. "Is that Silas Sterling? Who is the woman?" Julian turned toward the grand staircase. His glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, splashing scotch onto his polished shoes. He didn't notice. Descending the stairs was Silas Sterling, looking like a dark prince in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. But no one was looking at Silas. They were looking at the woman on his arm, Ilara. She was wearing a floor-length gown of deep emerald velvet that hugged every curve of her body. It was off the shoulder, showcasing her elegant neck and the diamond necklace that glittered under the chandeliers. But the dress was designed to highlight, not hide. It clung proudly to the 6-month swell of her pregnancy. She didn't look like the broken, weeping woman Julian had thrown out into the rain. She looked like a queen. Her skin glowed, her hair was styled in cascading waves, and her eyes scanned the room with a terrifying calmness. "Is that your ex-wife?" Clara asked, her voice shrill. "My God, she got fat." "She's pregnant," Julian whispered, the blood draining from his face. He did the math instantly. He had kicked her out 3 months ago. She looked 6 months along. It was his. A shockwave of possessiveness and panic hit him. That was his heir. That was his wife. And she was on the arm of his enemy. Silas guided Ilara through the crowd, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. The crowd parted for them. People who had stopped returning Julian's calls were now rushing to shake Silas's hand and bow to Ilara. Julian couldn't stop himself. He shoved past a waiter and marched towards them. "Ilara!" The shout stopped the room. Silas stopped walking and turned slowly. His face was a mask of stone. Ilara turned too, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was steady, cool water against his fire. "What is this?" Julian demanded, pointing at her stomach. Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you?" Ilara raised an eyebrow. "You gave me 10 minutes to pack. You told me I didn't fit your image. Does this fit your image, Julian? A pregnant woman you threw into the street?" Whispers erupted around them. The board members of rival companies were leaning in, hungry for the gossip. "I didn't know," Julian stammered, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. He switched tactics, trying to look the victim. "Ilara, honey, if I had known, you know I would never have let you go. That is my child." He reached out to grab her arm. Before his fingers could graze the velvet of her dress, Silas's hand shot out and clamped around Julian's wrist. The grip was bone-crushing. "Touch her," Silas said, his voice low and lethal, "and you will lose the hand." "This is my wife," Julian snarled, trying to pull away but failing. "Ex-wife," Silas corrected, "and she is under my protection. You threw her away, Thorn. You don't get to rummage through the trash for things you suddenly decided have value." "She's living with you?" Julian sneered, looking between them. "Sleeping your way to the top now, Ilara? That's how you survive?" Ilara stepped forward. She didn't hide behind Silas. She looked Julian dead in the eye. "I'm not sleeping my way to anything, Julian. I'm Sterling Global's new Chief Strategy Officer. And you know that slump your company has been in for the last quarter? The contracts you lost in Tokyo? The logistics failure in Hamburg? That was me." Julian stared at her, his mouth slightly open. The realization hit him like a truck. She wasn't just surviving. She was beating him. You stole my intellectual property, Julian accused, desperate. I wrote that property, Ilara said coldly, and unlike you, Silas pays me what I'm worth. Come on, Silas. The air in here smells like desperation. Silas released Julian's wrist with a shove. Julian stumbled back, nearly colliding with a waiter. He watched them walk away, the power couple of the evening. Clara appeared at his elbow, scowling. Well, that was embarrassing, she said. Everyone is laughing at you, Julian. Julian turned on her, his eyes wild. Shut up! Just shut up! He looked back at Ilara's retreating figure. He didn't just want her back. He needed her back. His company was failing without her, and she was carrying the only thing money couldn't buy, his legacy. I'm going to destroy him, Julian muttered to himself, and I'm taking her back. 2 weeks after the gala, Thorn Enterprises was in freefall. Julian sat in his office, surrounded by empty takeout boxes and legal notices. The stock price had plummeted 18% after the gala. Investors didn't like a CEO who publicly humiliated his pregnant ex-wife while his competitor flourished. To make matters worse, the Dubois merger was dead. Clara had broken off the engagement publicly via a tweet, stating she could not be associated with a man of declining fortune and class. Julian was alone, and he was obsessing. He had photos of Ilara taped to his glass whiteboard, not creepy photos, but paparazzi shots from the last few weeks. Ilara and Silas getting coffee. Ilara and Silas looking at baby clothes. Ilara laughing, a genuine laugh he hadn't heard in years. She's mine, he whispered, slamming his fist on the desk. He picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer, a shady man named Marcus who specialized in fixing difficult problems. Marcus, initiate the lawsuit, Julian commanded. Which one, Mr. Thorne? Custody, Julian said, his eyes cold. I want full custody of the unborn child, alleging that the mother is mentally unstable and living in an unsafe environment, and file a suit against Sterling for corporate espionage, freeze their assets. Sir, Marcus hesitated, the espionage suit won't hold water, and the custody battle, she has Silas Sterling's legal team behind her. It will be a bloodbath. I don't care about winning the lawsuit, you idiot, Julian screamed. I just need to scare her. I need to drain their resources and force a settlement. I want her to come to me begging to stop. Offer her a deal. She drops the lawsuit, comes back to me, and I drop the case. If she refuses, I bury her in litigation until the kid is 18. Understood, Marcus said. Julian hung up. He walked to the window. He knew Ilara. She was soft. She hated conflict. She would fold to protect the baby. Meanwhile, at Sterling Tower, Ilara was sitting in the nursery. It was finished now, painted a soft sage green with a crib that looked like a cloud. She was folding tiny onesies. Silas stood in the doorway, watching her. He had been doing that a lot lately, just watching her with a look of quiet reverence. You look sad, Silas said, walking in. I'm scared, Ilara admitted, putting down a pair of socks. I know Julian. He's quiet right now. That means he's planning something. Silas sat on the rocking chair opposite her. Let him plan. We're ready. You don't understand, Ilara sighed. He has no bottom. He will lie. He will cheat. He'll try to take the baby. Ilara. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. What? If Julian came back today, if he apologized, begged, and offered you your old life back, would you go? Do you still love him? Ilara looked at Silas. She saw the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, the way he had built a fortress around her when she was nothing but a ruin. I loved the man I thought he was, Ilara said softly. But that man never existed. I don't love him, Silas. I hate him. Not just for what he did to me, but for what he almost made me believe about myself, that I was worthless. You are the most valuable person I've ever met, Silas said intensely. He reached into his pocket. Ilara's breath hitched. Was he? But instead of a ring, Silas pulled out a folded document. I didn't want to show you this until after the baby was born, but I think you need to see it now, to understand that Julian can't hurt you anymore. Ilara took the paper. It was a financial report, a purchase order. What is this? She asked, scanning the lines. Julian is leveraged, Silas explained. He borrowed heavily against his company shares to fund his lifestyle and the failed merger. When his stock dropped last week, the banks called in the loans. He couldn't pay. Ilara looked up, her eyes wide. So the debt was sold on the secondary market this morning. Silas smiled, a dark, predatory smile. I bought it, Ilara. I own his debt. I own his mortgage. I own the building his office is in. Ilara gasped. You own him? Technically, yes. I can foreclose on Thorn Enterprises tomorrow. I can take his penthouse, his car, and the shirt off his back. Silas stood up and walked over to her, kneeling beside her chair so he was eye level with her stomach. I wanted to give you a gift, Silas whispered. I'm going to give you the pleasure of firing him. The next morning, Julian stormed into the lobby of Sterling Tower. He ignored the receptionist and marched toward the elevators. 2 massive security guards stepped in his path. Get out of my way, Julian barked. I'm here to see my wife. She's not your wife, Mr. Thorn, a voice boomed from the mezzanine. Silas stood on the balcony, looking down like a king addressing a peasant. Ilara stood beside him. Silas! Julian shouted, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. You were served the papers this morning. I'm taking the kid, and I'm taking you down for theft. Come up to the conference room, Julian, Silas called down calmly. Let's chat. Julian smirked. He's scared, he thought. He wants to settle. Julian rode the elevator up, straightening his tie. He walked into the conference room with a swagger he didn't truly feel. Ilara was sitting at the head of the table. Silas stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Ready to surrender? Julian asked, tossing his briefcase onto the table. Here are my terms. Ilara comes home today. She issues a public apology clearing my name. And you, Silas, you transfer the Asian logistics contracts to me as damages. Ilara looked at Julian. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel small. She felt pity. Julian, she said, did you check your email this morning? I don't have time for emails, he scoffed. You should, Silas said, because at 8:00 a.m., the primary creditor for Thorn Enterprises initiated a foreclosure sequence due to default on payment. Julian froze. What? That's impossible. The bank gave me an extension. The bank sold the debt, Silas said smoothly, to a holding company called Phoenix LLC. Who is Phoenix LLC? Julian demanded, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Me, Ilara said. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian stared at her, his face turning a shade of purple. You, he whispered. Silas provided the capital, Ilara said, her voice strong. But the company is in my name. I own your debt, Julian. I own your company. You can't do this, Julian screamed, lunging forward. Silas stepped in front of Ilara instantly, his presence massive and threatening. Julian stopped, breathing heavily. It's over, Ilara said from behind Silas. I'm dissolving Thorn Enterprises. I'm selling off the assets. The proceeds will go to charity, specifically to shelters for single mothers. You're ruining me, Julian cried, tears of rage streaming down his face. I built that company. I am a billionaire. You were a billionaire, Silas corrected. "Now, you're just a man with a lot of debt and a bad reputation. The board voted you out an hour ago, Julian. Security is clearing out your office as we speak." Julian looked at Alara. He saw the resolve in her eyes. He realized, finally, that the quiet woman he had ignored for 5 years had been the only thing holding his life together. And he had severed the tie himself. "Alara," he whimpered, falling to his knees. It was a pathetic display. "Please, I'm the father of your child. Don't do this. We can be a family. I love you." Alara stood up. She walked around the table and stood before him, but she didn't offer a hand. "You don't love me, Julian," she said sadly. "You love owning things, and you don't own me anymore. And you will never, ever own this child." She placed a document on the table. "Sign this," she said. "It's a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. If you sign it, I will forgive your personal debt. You walk away with nothing, but you won't go to jail for the fraud we found in your accounting books." Julian looked up, shocked. "You found the—" "Line 452, Alara smiled faintly. "You always were sloppy with the details." With a shaking hand, Julian took the pen. He looked at the document. He looked at Alara. He looked at Silas, who was watching him with pure contempt. He signed. "Get out," Silas said. Julian Thorne stood up. He looked smaller, older. He turned and walked out of the room, out of the building, and into the oblivion of irrelevance. The final trimester of Alara's pregnancy was a period of quiet, golden peace that stood in stark contrast to the chaos of her marriage to Julian. The penthouse at Stirling Tower, once a fortress of solitude for Silas, had transformed. It was no longer just a bachelor's high-tech sanctuary. It was a home. Silas had become a different man. The Wolf of Wall Street, known for eviscerating competitors before breakfast, now left meetings early. He spent his evenings in the library, not analyzing stocks, but reading aloud to Alara's stomach. He had read somewhere that the baby could hear voices, and he was determined that the child would know his voice as well as Alara's. One rainy Tuesday night in November, the air in the penthouse was thick with anticipation. Alara was sitting by the window, watching the storm lash against the glass. It reminded her of the night Julian had thrown her out, the cold, the fear, the absolute loneliness. But then she felt a warm hand on her shoulder. "You're thinking about him," Silas said softly. It wasn't a question. He knew her too well now. Alara covered his hand with hers. "I'm thinking about how different the rain looks from inside a warm house," she whispered. "I'm thinking that I haven't felt cold in 6 months because of you." Silas knelt beside her chair, a habit he had developed as her mobility decreased. "You will never be cold again, Alara. I promised you that." He was about to say something else, perhaps something that would bridge the gap between partners and lovers that they had been dancing around for weeks, when Alara gasped. Her hand flew to her abdomen, her fingers digging into the fabric of her dress. "Silas!" she choked out, her eyes widening in panic. "What is it? The baby?" Silas was instantly on alert, his eyes scanning her face for signs of distress. "I think—" Alara winced as a contraction rippled through her, stronger and deeper than the Braxton Hicks she had felt before. "I think it's time." The water broke a second later. What followed was a masterclass in crisis management, executed by Silas Sterling. There was no panic, only terrifying efficiency. He had the private elevator waiting before Alara had even stood up. The car was downstairs in 30 seconds. He had the hospital on the line, barking orders at the chief of medicine, ensuring the private wing was prepped. But the moment they settled into the back of the limousine, the CEO mask slipped. Alara gripped his hand so hard her knuckles turned white. breathing through a jagged wave of pain. Silas looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the situation, but fear of loss. "Stay with me," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Just breathe, Elara. I've got you." The labor was long, brutally long. For 14 hours Elara fought. The doctors were concerned about her blood pressure, a lingering effect of the stress from the divorce and the high-risk nature of the pregnancy. The room was a blur of beeping monitors and hushed medical conversations. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Elara had one anchor: Silas. He never left. The nurses tried to shoo him out during the epidural, but he refused to move. He wiped the sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. He held a cup of ice chips to her lips. When the pain became unbearable, and Elara began to cry, whispering that she couldn't do it, that she wasn't strong enough, Silas was there, his face inches from hers. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "You destroyed a billionaire's empire while 6 months pregnant. You rebuilt my company from a laptop in a spare room. You are the strongest woman I have ever met. You can do this." "I'm scared," she sobbed. "Silas, if something happens to me, promise me you'll take him. Don't let Julian near him." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Silas said fiercely, his voice cracking, "because I am not letting you go. We do this together. We finish this together." At 4:12 a.m., as the first grey light of dawn crept over the New York skyline, the room fell silent, followed by a sharp, indignant cry. The sound filled the room, louder than the storm outside, louder than the doubts in Elara's head. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, her voice filled with relief. "He's here." They placed the baby on Elara's chest. He was small, red-faced and squirming, with a tuft of dark hair and a pair of lungs that demanded attention. Elara touched his cheek, her tears falling freely now. The love that surged through her was overwhelming, a tidal wave that washed away every scar Julian had left on her soul. "Hi," she whispered brokenly. "Hi, my love." She looked up at Silas. He was standing by the bedside, staring at the child with an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder. He looked terrified to touch him. "Silas," Elara said softly. "Come here." Tentatively, the man who moved billions of dollars with a single signature reached out a finger. The baby's tiny hand, instinctively searching, clamped around Silas's index finger. Silas let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He collapsed into the chair beside the bed, his forehead resting against Elara's arm, his finger still held captive by the newborn. "He's perfect," Silas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He's absolutely perfect." "He needs a name," Elara said, stroking Silas's hair. Silas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "You said you liked Leo." "Leo," Elara nodded, looking down at her son. "Leo. It means a lion, because he's going to be brave." "Leo," Silas tested the name. "Leo Vance." Elara hesitated. She looked at the man who had saved her life, the man who had sat in this chair for 14 hours, the man who was currently being held hostage by a 5-minute-old infant. "Leo Sterling," she corrected him. Silas froze. He looked at her, searching her eyes for any sign of hesitation. "Elara, you don't have to. Names have power. That name carries a lot of weight." "I know." She smiled tiredly. "That's why I chose it. He deserves a father who knows what loyalty is. He deserves you." The transition from the hospital to the penthouse was seamless, yet everything felt different. The dynamic of the house had shifted. It was no longer a workspace. It was a sanctuary for a family. 2 weeks passed. Ilara was recovering well, her strength returning day by day. Silas had taken paternity leave, something the board of directors found shocking, but none dared to question. One evening, Ilara was in the nursery. She had just finally gotten Leo to sleep. The room was dimly lit by a moon-shaped lamp, casting a soft glow over the crib. She stood there for a long time, just watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. "You stare at him like he's going to disappear." Silas's voice came from the doorway. Ilara turned. Silas was leaning against the doorframe, holding 2 mugs of herbal tea. He walked in quietly, handing her one. "I spent so many months terrified that Julian would find a way to take him," Ilara admitted, sipping the tea, "or that I wouldn't be enough, that a single mother couldn't raise a boy to be a good man." "He won't be raised by a single mother," Silas said quietly. He set his mug down on the changing table and walked over to her. The space between them, usually charged with unspoken professional respect, was now humming with something far more personal. "Ilara," Silas began, his voice low, "we need to talk about the arrangement." Ilara's heart dropped. The arrangement, the employment contract, the housing agreement. Was this it? Was he going to ask her to move out now that the baby was born? Now that the drama with Julian was over? "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands began to tremble. "I can start looking for a place next week. I have enough savings now, thanks to the bonus you gave me. I won't impose on you any longer." Silas stared at her, his brow furrowing. Then he let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Move out? Is that what you think I want? Well, the contract." "Burn the contract," Silas growled softly. He took a step closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her breath hitch. "Ilara, do you really think I did all of this? The lawsuit, the debt buyout, the nursery, for business strategy?" I don't know," she stammered. "I didn't do it for revenge against Julian," Silas confessed, his eyes locked onto hers. "I mean, destroying him was a nice bonus, but I did it because the moment I saw you in that diner, with coffee stains on your apron and fire in your eyes, I knew I was in trouble." He reached out and took her hands. His palms were warm and calloused. "I lost my heart years ago," Silas whispered. "I thought it was gone for good. I thought I was just a machine built to make money. And then you walked in. You and this little lion." He gestured to the crib. "You woke me up, Ilara." He reached into his pocket. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Silas went down on one knee. The floorboards of the nursery creaked softly. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside sat a ring that made the one Julian had given her look like a toy. It was a vintage sapphire, deep and blue like the ocean, surrounded by a halo of antique diamonds. It wasn't flashy. It was substantial. It was a ring meant to be worn by a matriarch, a partner, a queen. "This was my grandmother's," Silas said, looking up at her with a vulnerability that stripped him bare. "She told me never to give it to a woman unless I couldn't breathe without her. Ilara, I can't breathe without you. I don't want to be your boss. I don't want to be your landlord. I want to be your husband. I want to be Leo's father. I want to come home to you every day for the rest of my life." Tears spilled over Ilara's cheeks, hot and fast. "Silas, marry me," he pleaded softly. "Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel unwanted again." Ilara dropped to her knees so she was eye level with him. She didn't care about the dress or the floor. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "Yes," she sobbed into his shirt. "Yes, Silas. 1,000 times yes." Silas let out a ragged breath of relief and pulled her tight against him, burying his face in her hair. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. In the crib, Leo stirred, let out a small sigh, and went back to sleep, unaware that his mother had just secured their forever. Epilogue. 5 years later. The sun was setting over the Hamptons, painting the sky in streaks of violet and orange. The Sterling estate sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, a sprawling masterpiece of architecture that was filled with light and noise. Ilara sat on the patio, a glass of iced tea in her hand. She was scrolling through her tablet, looking at the latest issue of Forbes magazine. The cover featured a woman in a sharp white suit, looking powerful and serene. The headline read, "The Phoenix Rises, How Ilara Sterling Redefined Ethical Business." She smiled. It had been a long road. After they married, she and Silas had merged their visions. They had launched a venture capital fund specifically for women-led startups and those who had been disenfranchised by the corporate machine. They were wealthier now than Silas had ever been alone. But the money felt different. It felt clean. "Mum! Mum, look!" Ilara looked up. A 5-year-old boy with messy dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes came sprinting across the lawn. Leo. He was holding a very confused frog. "I caught a dinosaur," Leo announced proudly, presenting the frog. "That is a very slimy dinosaur, Leo." Ilara laughed, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek. Behind him, a man walked out of the garden. Silas Sterling looked different. The harsh lines around his mouth had softened. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, his feet bare in the grass. He looked younger, happier. "He gets the hunting skills from you," Silas teased, dropping a kiss on the top of Ilara's head. "And the stubbornness." "He gets the charm from you," Ilara countered, leaning back into his touch. Silas sat on the edge of her lounge chair. "I got a call today." "Oh?" "From a car rental agency in Ohio," Silas said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Apparently the branch manager was fired for trying to embezzle funds from the petty cash drawer. He's facing jail time." "Julian?" Ilara asked, the name feeling foreign on her tongue, like a word from a language she no longer spoke. "Julian," Silas confirmed. "He called asking for a character reference. He wanted me to call the DA for him." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "And what did you do?" "I told him I was busy playing dinosaurs with my son," Silas said, reaching out to tickle Leo, who shrieked with laughter. Ilara watched them play. The man who had saved her, and the son who had saved them both. She rested her hand on her stomach, where a familiar flutter had begun a few weeks ago. She hadn't told Silas yet. She was waiting for the perfect moment. Maybe dinner tonight. Another baby. Another chapter. She looked out at the ocean. The waves that had once seemed so terrifying during the storms were now just a rhythm, a song of consistency and strength. She had been abandoned. She had been broken. She had been left in the rain with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. But she had kept walking. She had walked through the fire, and she had found the one thing money couldn't buy. She found home. "Silas," she called out. He looked up, his smile blinding. "Yeah? Come here." She patted the seat beside her. "I have a surprise for you." As he walked over, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden halo around the family that love had built. And for Ilara Sterling, it was just the beginning. Ilara's story proves that sometimes your greatest loss is actually your greatest gain. Julian thought Ilara was worthless because she didn't fit his image, but he failed to realize that she was the architect of his success. In his arrogance, he threw away a diamond to chase a glittery stone, and by the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. Silas, on the other hand, recognized value when he saw it. He didn't just see a broken woman, he saw a partner, a queen, and a mother. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and true love, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Alara's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.